80% of the supermarket has added sugar in it. And also gluten-free brands, anything that's kind of in the quote unquote health food aisle oftentimes still has a lot of added sugar. The more that we can kind of reduce the mindless sugar, the sugar that we don't even think we're eating in like pasta sauce, in peanut butter, it's really in sandwich bread, it's kind of snuck in a lot of places in the industrialized food movement.
Hey, Heal Squad, welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Phoebe Lapine. She, of course, is the chef, author, and all-around carb queen, leading us to our carb freedom. Last time we got personal, diving into Phoebe's health journey and how she turned her diagnosis into a delicious mission. Today, we're going even deeper into her newest book, Carbivore, and tracking all the carb questions you didn't even know you had. We're going to talk about how to ditch the elimination diets for good while still balancing our blood sugar and supporting our hormone health, plus her signature slow carb approach, and how simple carb companions can make all the difference in how we feel. And of course, what to look for in the bread and pasta aisle and why pasta in Italy is better, not what you really think it is. Let's dive back in. I'm starting to notice things like I made my first almond flour crust the other day. It was very exciting. But there are some almond flours that say that they're bleached and unbleached and blanched and whatever the hell. There's so many of these things, and I don't know what these things mean.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many, that's kind of the problem with the grocery store these days. I mean, as someone who's gluten-free, I am amazed by the amount of variety that you can find now, but it's also really confusing because then we conflate, lentil pasta as being quote unquote better than just regular wheat pasta. And I would argue it actually comes down to more how that pasta is made than what it's made from. So an example that I'll just give since we're on the subject is essentially I hear from a lot of people with gluten allergies who say, oh, I go to Italy, I go to, France, and I can eat the bread or the pasta there and I feel totally fine. I'm not as bloated afterwards and whatnot. And so a lot of people say, well, like, oh, the pasta in Italy it's because it's made with less gluten in the flour. And actually the complete opposite is true. So Italian pasta classically made from semolina wheat. Semolina wheat is high protein. Hello, gluten's a protein. So it's actually a higher gluten flour, which is why Italian pasta has that signature kind of flexibility and chewiness to it, makes excellent pasta. However, the way that it was processed, back in the day before industrialization took over, is that those noodles would be dried out in the sun. It's a slow process. Again, slow is kind of like the key word when it comes to carbs across the board. But what would happen, the analogy that I like to give people who, have some experience in the kitchen is when you think about animal protein and cooking it, if you take, a steak directly from the fridge and put it in a piping hot pan, that protein, that meat is going to seize up. It's going to be half of the size. And then, eventually you take it off and hopefully, ideally from a culinary perspective, you let it rest on the cutting board and, some of that relaxation happens again. But that's just what happens when you have an extreme temperature change. So when you make pasta in an industrialized fashion, that dry time, it's like flash dried. It happens really quickly. And what happens as a result is the gluten is kind of this fine mesh that's really hard to break down as a result. It's kind of like a really tight knit, like cotton versus a loose weave, sweater in terms of what your body has to break down. So some people, I think, are experiencing a digestive issue that's really just a result of how something is made and not necessarily what it's made from. And that is true for a lot of bread as well, in terms of, sourdough fermentation and a slow rise time. All of these things have been sped up in the industrialized process. Oftentimes, in the case of bread, they do add extra gluten in order to knead the bread and get that elasticity a lot faster versus the slow, 24, 48-hour method. And the result there too is, without the sourdough fermentation, which literally eats some of the gluten and eats some of the carb count in our bread, you're going to have a higher carb count. You're going to have more gluten. And, for various reasons, it might be harder for you to digest as well. So I think, for me, it's thinking about the way we eat things, the way we prepare them. We can't necessarily control the way that they're grown. There's pesticides as a whole part of the conversation as well. But, kind of my book is really about strategies for the things we can control, what happens when things come into our kitchen. So I try not to stress too much about, bleached, unbleached, what have you, and to think like more from a macro perspective on what is the least processed ingredient. And it's a complete spectrum. When people talk about highly processed foods, they're talking about chicken fingers and deli meat. They're not talking about, the blanched versus the unblanched
What
almond.
is unblanched versus blanched? I don't even know.
I think it's with the like peel removed. So how you
Okay.
get like Marcona almonds, or sometimes you can buy blanched almonds that don't have
Oh, yeah.
the
Okay.
brown skin, I guess you
Got
would
it.
call it.
Okay.
So I think it's more for, well, it's probably less fiber as a result, but I think it's probably more for like aesthetic reasons, like it's
Got
a
it.
paler flour. But again, like so the almond meal itself is processed. It's going to have a different effect on your body than eating a whole almond, and certainly drinking almond milk even less. So, back to fiber, since that is actually what's in question across these foods. So fiber, when it enters the body, first of all, it's essentially glucose. All plant matter is a carbohydrate. So if we're talking about carbs, from a slang perspective, we're usually talking about starches. But if we were to remove all carbohydrates, we'd removing all plants, and I think doing our gut a huge disservice. So the beauty of fiber, though, is that it is a string of glucose molecules that cannot be broken down and therefore doesn't enter the bloodstream in the small intestine. Instead, it passes through our system into the large intestine, where again, it feeds our good gut critters. But it also has an extreme superpower as it passes through. Oftentimes, that fiber kind of coats our small intestinal wall and creates this like sludgy slurry. That means any simple sugars, any readily available glucose can't pass through as easily. I'll give you another culinary analogy, since that is, the way my brain works. But if you were to take, a fine mesh sieve and pour some apple juice through it, it would be, an unobstructed waterfall. But if you were to take apples and try and mash it through that sieve, even if, you mashed it with all your might, you would still have the skins, you would still have all these microscopic fibers that would create, a barrier on that sieve, so that even if you pour apple juice into it afterwards, it's going to be much more of a drip drip instead of just this unobstructed stream. So that's kind of what happens in our system when we eat fiber. So the thing is, however, you're going to look at packages, you're going to be like, oh, this has 30 grams of fiber. And it happens with nut milks. You're like, oh my gosh, the almond milk has so much fiber. But think about what would happen with that fine mesh sieve if you poured the almond milk through it. Just because it had fiber in the original ingredient does not mean it's going to give you that protective effect once it reaches your gut. And this is purely from a blood sugar perspective. I mean, what
Wow.
that microscopic fiber does for our gut critters, I'm not sure. Sure, it's probably helpful to some extent, but you're not going to get that kind of slurry that helps to slow your carbs roll to your bloodstream. So, again, that's why I say eating a whole almond, very different than eating the almond meal, very different than the milk. And it's why kind of these differences in pasta is a little bit negligible. Again, like you're eating lentil pasta, which again, like started from something that is higher in fiber than regular wheat, but it's already highly processed. So it's not going to really create much of a barrier for anything you're eating with it or afterwards. Kind of the biggest tip that you can take with you is to add, more whole plant fiber to that pasta, no matter what it is. And I think that frees a lot of people up because we worry and we stress about, facing all of these options in the grocery store. And it's kind of complicating, it's all processed food. Like it's kind of complicating the real common sense tips, which is just to eat as many vegetables as possible. Or
Wow.
nuts or seeds. I love adding nuts and seeds to various things.
So again, just needing to hear all of this just in this moment as someone who's dealing with blood sugar stuff, because I've never heard anybody explain it like the sieve, but with the almonds, if you use the same idea you have with the apples, if I tried to crush the almonds, well, I guess you couldn't really crush them. And yeah, wouldn't it create the same thing?
Yeah, no, the almonds is thumbs up. The almond
Okay.
meal, because it's like it's doing the job that your body, your teeth, your
Have to
stomach
do.
can't do. Like it's taking it so far that it's not forcing your body to do any of the work. And by the way, it's a tricky situation because I come from, the IBS and the SIBO communities, and those people have such digestive dysfunction that they actually do sometimes need the machines to do the work for them. So for them, kind of blood sugar strategy is going to look a lot different than someone with diabetes or with any sort of insulin sensitivity or dysfunction who's trying to incorporate some carbs and have them not cause as big of an issue. So again, all these things are siloed and we do have to choose our own adventure, choose our own carb
Yeah.
adventure, choose our own strategies that can fit, what our particular frailties are at any given moment.
It makes so much sense, and I love what you're saying because it's not one size fits all.
Yeah,
So SIBO and that community, they have to do things in a different way than someone like myself. But I think a lot of people are dealing with blood sugar stuff, whether they're actually diabetic or
right.
not. So I guess my takeaway is like if you are going to have a lentil pasta because you don't want to have the wheat for some reason, maybe you're celiac too and diabetic,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's to eat something real with fiber to replace the
Yes.
notion that the lentil is going to be your fiber. And
Yes.
then also to be able to look at, when I look at almond milk now, I'm not going to look at its fiber content because a lot of diabetics will subtract the fiber content from
Yep.
the carbs to create the ratio they need for their insulin. And I think anything processed now, we can look at it differently. When you first started talking about this, I'm like, I have no idea what she's talking about. Now I get
Well, if
it.
you wear a continuous glucose monitor, you can do these experiments yourself at home. Just eat the same exact dish. I mean, maybe it's like pasta with tomato sauce. Try it with the two different types of pasta. See if there's any difference. I won't guarantee you, but it's going to be negligible versus take the same type of pasta and add like spinach to it
Yeah.
or eat a spinach salad, arugula salad before you eat your pasta. So again, you have that barrier there. Then eat the pasta. Like that is going to actually have such a bigger impact than the pasta itself and what type it is.
Wow. Don't even think I've heard a nutritionist for diabetics share that, which is hilarious.
And these aren't
But
like get out of jail free cards. These are just kind of strategies that you can layer and experiment with and again find your Goldilocks carb lifestyle.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm even thinking about now that I nailed my almond flour monk fruit crust, I'm gonna make an apple pie that's sugar free. But the apples will be the fiber.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can add, some chopped walnuts on top, or I love adding chia seeds and hemp seeds and flax seeds. I keep just like big jars of them and we'll sprinkle like every type into various things. I make a lot of like baked oatmeal and do that. And again, they're pretty innocuous in terms of flavor and texture for that matter. And you don't really notice they're there, but they're working hard for you. I call these things carb companions again, because it's like about adding instead of taking away. And I have a few recipes in the book for nut and seed sprinkles, and they all last, for many, many months, either on the counter or in the fridge. And I just make every single type, and they're truly delicious, spice based combinations that add a lot of deliciousness to your meals. You don't even have to think of it as, a purely health related need. But yeah, I think that they're a really fun way to kind of offset again, like counteract the carbs on your plate.
Yeah, a carb companion. Um, I think the chia seeds I want to ask, I've heard that you don't want to have the chia seeds put into something whole. You want the chia powder, but because
Hmm.
the chia seeds will then expand in your digestive tract. Is that
I mean, some people literally add chia seeds to water and drink it as a way to like clean out their
move?
system. Yeah.
Got it.
So
Okay.
I think again, it depends on where your digestion is at. Again, some people with IBS, that's a lot of fiber, may not work for them. But I particularly like it in any sort of baking recipe, like, or, like overnight oats, something like that, where there is liquid, where it will expand naturally. Yeah, I don't actually use the chia seeds as one of my sprinkles per se. But I do kind of mix it into various recipes.
Recipes.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I would also love to chat a little bit about fat as part of that
Mm.
barrier because I feel like what I have learned is you want fiber and you want fat. So I make sure I
Hmm.
have like avocado with something I'm eating. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I
Is
would
that a good
define
carb
a
companion?
carb companion, yes, as anything with fiber, healthy fat, or protein. Um, Healthy fat and protein also slow your carbs roll, but they don't have that kind of protective effect in the small intestine. But they do slow gastric emptying, which just means that the food that's in your stomach won't be released into your small intestine as quickly. So again, it's all part of the slow carb method, but for different reasons.
I like the slow carb method. I think this is really, really exciting. What about women with perimenopause or
Mm.
menopause? Tell me about the carbivore diet and what that can do for that.
Yeah. So as we age, we naturally become a little bit more reactive. We kind of lose our insulin modulation abilities, and so yeah, a lot of people who are entering that period of time may notice that the things that they used to eat aren't making them feel so good anymore. Cravings are coming back. You're getting that kind of mid afternoon crash of energy. I certainly have had to kind of take a look at my habits over the years and be like, okay, I'm starting to inch inch closer to this demo, and starting to experience some of the effects. So yeah, I think it's another area where I do think it's important, not necessarily to omit, but to just relook at, the foods that are on your plate and to be a little bit more cognizant of carbs. But I also say what we haven't talked about a part of this conversation, and I think, needs to be a bigger part of it, is that we would all be better off just reducing our added sugar. I think that is such I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's a place that many people could start before even getting crazy around other carbs. So I always encourage people to start there because I think they're, again, if we're shopping primarily, getting a lot of, store-bought shortcuts at the grocery store, 80% of the supermarket has added sugar in it. And also gluten-free brands, anything that's kind of in the quote unquote health food aisle oftentimes still has a lot of added sugar, even if it's natural sugar, even if it's, made from date paste, or coconut sugar, it's still is sugar at the end of the day once it reaches our system. So the more that we can kind of reduce the mindless sugar, the sugar that we don't even think we're eating in like pasta sauce, in peanut butter, it's really in sandwich bread, it's kind of snuck in a lot of places in the industrialized food movement, which a lot of the time, which did start in the 90s with the low fat movement. So I'm actually glad you brought up fat because it is one way that we went really wrong in processed food is taking out the fat because the carb count just went up across the board in terms of everything we were eating. But yes, in terms of carbs themselves, I would say these strategies for someone getting a little bit older, especially women, I would definitely look at some of these strategies to see how they alone could offset some of the foods that you want to keep on your plate because you love them.
Yeah, it's funny when you go into those food aisles and you start getting like, the gluten-free this and the gluten-free that, not only are there added sugars, but there's so many ingredients you don't
Oh, yeah.
know what they are, or they have oils, canola oils and all that. I'm like, wait, how is this healthy? It's so crazy, but
It's not.
we have
I'd
to pay more
rather eat
attention.
the regular
The
stuff if
real
I
shit.
could. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, or like the almond milks have all these gums in
Gums.
there and like all of that stuff, and you're like, well, I'm just gonna drink the regular stuff. Like, what
Yeah.
am I
Whole
gonna do? This
milk.
is
Go for it. Yes.
it's crazy how we keep trying to find our way, and then it just should just go back to like natural everything. But I want to go back to bread before we wrap up, because I want to make sure people understand, because I think I still don't understand the best bread to eat. I know
Mm,
sourdough is supposedly the best. But is it wheat rather than white? Is it because, white flour is so bad? And when you go back to thinking about your Italy discussion, again, you made so much sense with the way it's processed. And I think that going back to our education on the sun and the importance of the sun, the fact that
mm,
their pasta is laid out in the sun, right? Like, think about photosynthesis doesn't happen without the
mm,
sun. The sun probably has a really integral role in
mm,
the processing of that, not just for the way it's dried, but for whatever other process happens there. I
mm.
think would be really interesting to study. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't know about that, but I will say for those of you at home who are like, I can't go to Italy tomorrow. If you go into the regular grocery store, you will see certain brands that say slow dried on the front, or if it's an Italian brand, Lenta. I guarantee if you look, you will find an option. There are a few brands that I know I buy on the regular, and yeah, it's not impossible to find. They're not laying it out in the sun, but they're
yeah.
slow drying it.
But also, some people, there are small little Italian food stores, you know?
Yeah,
So, like, there are Greek stores, you can get Greek things. There's Italian stores too
for
that
sure.
import this stuff.
Yes, it is. There are options for you. But in terms of bread, yes. So similar to the pasta, whole wheat versus white, like sure, the bleach like grains isn't great, but in terms of blood sugar, not going to have a huge effect because again, it's processed. I would say any bread that has whole seeds in it or around it, that's going to be a little bit better. But then sourdough in general is just, again, a slower process. The bacteria reduce the carb count. It's not necessarily sourdough that you would find like shrink wrapped in the grocery store. It would have to be made kind of the artisanal way. So anything at the farmer's market is usually a true sourdough. But if you're buying locally from a baker, just ask. Just ask what the process is and say, is this a true sourdough?
Love it. Phoebe,
Yeah.
this is incredible. Guys, I think this is a really, really great book to start your year off right, because I know that I'm incorporating carbs back in since I got this. And I love all your experiments, and I feel like there'll
Thank
be many
you.
more to come.
Yes, let's hope my next chapter is a little bit less dramatic, but I'm
Oh
sure
my
that
God.
life will throw me more curveballs.
I get it, Phoebe. I get it. It's so wild how these things happen, and we're making lemonade out of them.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but it's, yeah, I sometimes I'm like, God, can we slow the roll a little bit?
Totally. Totally.
But thank you for chatting with us and sharing all your insights, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.
So yeah, but I don't know if it was you or Priscilla being like, "Oh my God," and like, "This is me" in the chat while she was
It was
talking.
it was
Yes.
me because she was speaking directly to me the whole time. I was like, wow. I felt called out in the best ways. I mean, with the Hashimoto stuff and really having an understanding of how your food impacts. I didn't even think about that. From gluten and all the things we're eating, and then the red lentil pasta that she called out specifically, that's what I had for dinner yesterday. I'm like, oh,
Dying.
okay, got it.
And you were eating that because,
Well, one, it's got more protein, and so that is important to me. But also, I'm a little scared of gluten, even though I'm not gluten intolerant to my knowledge or celiac or anything. I've just, with everything that you hear about gluten, I'm like, maybe it's bad for you. So I try and avoid it, but I don't know, maybe that's it, maybe that's not even it. But what I loved is that she shared about the fiber, and I had heard a little bit about this. I had seen some videos on TikTok. Hopefully, she's still around. Of this guy who had this glucose monitor, and he would try different combinations of food to see how it spiked his blood sugar. And so, her mentioning having fiber alongside the carbs was like a mind-blowing thing
Mhm.
for me, and my sister who has type 1 diabetes, I'm definitely sharing that with her. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. And then even just like the fermented foods, but also like thinking that you're having more protein with the lentil pasta, but it's been processed. So the protein is not there. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
amazing. That's why we have to keep on learning and learning and learning because, um, it's, I don't know, it's just, it's wild to me. And even now understanding the process of the sourdough is really helpful for me because now I'm like, oh, the slow fermentation. Okay. And I really think we should talk to Dr. Allison about the sun's involvement in the food because I think there's going to be a connection there that's deeper than it was just dried in the sun in a slow process. I think that's part of it. But I
Mhm.
think that that might be a really interesting deep dive.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was like the process from beginning to end, which is so fascinating that we don't think of. Whenever I've always heard of like processed food is bad, but everything is processed in some kind of way. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
way it's processed. And from processing in the sun and the noodles or whatever being just processed in the sun and the way, she had talked about the steak kind of seizing up and then laying to rest and how our digestive system plays such a crucial role in that whole thing and how can we actually help it to digest easier and looking at it from that way versus something is just bad or good. It's just
Yeah.
your understanding.
Yeah. Elisa Vitti, and the glucose goddess, I think, one of them taught me to eat or taught us to eat vegetables before everything.
Mhm.
And that basically prepares your system. It's like food's coming, guys. Everyone be chill. Here's some, fiber coming down the pike. And then you eat your protein and fat, and then you layer in any carbs. Now, they didn't explain it the way she just explained it. But now, if you combine everybody together, now it's like, oh, because I always start with like a salad or a cucumber before I eat anything. And now I'm understanding the visual of the track, having
Mhm.
that coating so that when you pour the sugar down, which is the carb or the whatever, there's something to hold it together so that it just doesn't spike your blood sugar. And
Yeah.
that's for everybody, not just diabetics. For us, it's like super, super important, but for everybody, so that you don't become insulin resistant because you don't want those crazy highs and lows all the time.
Yeah.
That's really, really helpful. So, I mean, dang, like just another great episode. And I always love it when I'm getting comments from you guys. That's when I'm like, oh, okay, this is hitting. This is hitting. It's good. So
I was freaking out during it. I was like, wow, she's speaking to me. I'm shook. And I was writing
yeah,
everything down so
you
I
wrote,
know what
I'm
to
shook.
do.
Meanwhile, I'm like, this is a great line so that we pulled that for social or we pulled this for, a clip. But
Mhm.
friends, if this was resonating with you like it did with Gabby and Priscilla, definitely share it with your friends. And in the meantime, be nice people, make good choices, and be present. Hey, Heal Squad. We have been on quite the journey together, and we're hearing from so many of you just how much this show is helping you heal and get better, and it makes us feel so good. We love, love, love it, and we just ask that you don't keep it to yourself. Spread the message and share the show or your favorite episode with your friends. And if you want to help us even more, you can leave us a 5-star rating and a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on Instagram at Heal Squad. You can also DM us anytime because we love connecting with you. And finally, you can also join us on Patreon for our monthly live heal events with world-class healers and ad-free episodes exclusive only to Patreon and our Super Heal Squad for as little as $10 a month. So go to patreon.com/Heal Squad to join. Getting better isn't easy, friends, but as I say all the time, it's a whole lot easier if we can do it together. We love you all so much, and we love doing this thing called life with you.
This podcast and all related content published or distributed by or on behalf of Maria Menounos or MariaMenounos.com is for informational purposes only and may include information that is general in nature and that is not specific to you. Any information or opinions expressed or contained herein are not intended to serve as or replace medical advice, nor to diagnose, prescribe, or treat any disease, condition, illness, or injury, and you should consult the healthcare professional of your choice regarding all matters concerning your health, including before beginning any exercise, weight loss, or healthcare program. If you have or suspect you may have a healthcare emergency, please contact a qualified healthcare professional for treatment. Any information or opinions provided by a guest expert or host featured within website or on company's podcast are their own, not those of Maria Menounos or the company. Accordingly, Maria Menounos and the company cannot be responsible for any results or consequences or actions you may take based on information or opinions.